I'm so grateful to be here, and the Great Way so far has just been such an incredible journey. And I just want to give a huge thanks to the entire team for putting all this together and giving me the opportunity to share today. So my name is Anna. I'm the co-founder of Lioness. We're a sexual wellness startup that built the first and only smart vibrator that helps you understand your sexual pleasure through your own orgasm data. And I wanted to share some of my own personal journey of how I ended up going from being a mechanical engineer at Amazon to building smart vibrators, because I promise you, I didn't grow up standing in front of my preschool class announcing that I wanted to make sex toys for a living. In fact, it was quite the opposite. I grew up in a Korean immigrant, very conservative, very religious family where we never talked about sex. And when I was a child, I actually experienced sexual trauma. And so like so many in our culture, I did what was normal and stayed silent, suppressing the shame, the guilt I felt because I thought it was my and only my cross to carry. This made me scared of my own body well into my mid-20s, feeling like I wasn't normal and that I didn't deserve or have permission to love my own body. And I felt like there was nowhere to turn for all those questions and fears I had about my body, not to my doctors, not to my family, not to my friends, not to my partners, because the only answer I ever got was, well, just every body is different. And that was it. And so when we started our company, over and over again, we'd get people asking us the questions of why they couldn't orgasm, how they could communicate better with their partner, or the question of what was wrong with them. And it was the same question of, am I normal? And I had this sudden realization that I wasn't alone in the amount of questions I had about my own body. It wasn't me that had failed me, but it's this one-dimensional way our society and culture has raised us to view sexual pleasure, especially for women and people with vaginas. Most of the time, we leave sexual pleasure as something that's slightly mysterious, slightly elusive, which at times can be absolutely beautiful, but we've never really given an opportunity to be understood quantitatively. What makes it better? What makes it worse? What makes it different? Sexual pleasure is an essential human need as eating, breathing, sleeping, and for decades, millions of dollars to fund thousands of research to the nuances of those things. But when it comes to sexual pleasure, especially for people with vaginas, one of the most cutting edge studies on physiological arousal and orgasms for people with vaginas, which is still referred to by doctors today and researchers, is a study from the 1980s, and it's a sample size of 11 women. 11 women is what we're basing so much of our understanding on from the 1980s. And to this day, research is constantly denied and defunded because of the stigma and taboo around female sexual wellness. So how can we really give ourselves opportunities to truly understand our sexual pleasure when the societal taboo holds back research? So before we could really tackle that behemoth effort to changing an entire societal taboo, we realized we really had to help ourselves first. So when I was working on Linus, it really became my own healing journey in giving myself permission to explore my own body, because I was able to pull that cultural shame and pleasure around orgasms and pleasure because it became something bigger than sexual pleasure. It became an opportunity to understand my own body and being able to answer my own whys. Am I normal? Why does my body do this? And so I just wanted to share some of that 6-year journey I've had so far with some awesome graphs, because it's kind of a new way to, I think, visualize orgasms and pleasure. And I guess as an engineer, I do love a good graph. So let me share my screen real quickly. So here we go. So the biggest way we can actually indicate arousal and orgasm is through pelvic floor movements. So how the vagina or your pelvic floor muscles are squeezing and relaxing. So it depends on the force or the rhythm or anything like that. And one of the biggest breaking points in the beginning of my journey of self-exploration was realizing that there's actually different patterns in the way you orgasm. And I'm not talking like vaginal, clitoral, or anal, but actually each person is really uniquely different in how their pelvic floor muscles squeeze and relax during an orgasm. And what we've seen so far in our research and previous research is that you don't jump from one pattern to another pattern. And so this was like a really big finding moment for me to realize, like, when I talked with friends and they would explain how their orgasm looks, I didn't really understand what I was looking at until I realized that I might just be having a different pattern than somebody else. So for example, so the three patterns that we've so far fleshed out are the ocean wave, avalanche, and volcano. And ocean wave is actually my type of pattern and so fitting for the great wave. But so the red is where the orgasm is, and your pelvic floor muscles kind of do this very rhythmic squeezing and relaxing. So, and it's really consistent in force. And then an avalanche is, it starts very, very high in force and it trickles down. It has the same rhythm as an ocean wave, but actually lowers in force over time. And then a volcano is kind of what your classic movie-esque orgasm is. It's a huge explosion of force at the very end, and then a quick drop in force without really any rhythmic pelvic floor movement. And this was kind of a really great indicator for me to realize where I was, how I was different from somebody else. So once you kind of understand your pattern in which you're orgasming, I was able to take that and start experimenting and seeing the different external factors that affect my sexual pleasure by comparing it to what I would call my quote unquote typical normal session, which you can see on the left with the green border. And for example, even something like a cup of coffee and seeing how your pelvic floor movement changes with that, where you can see a lot more rhythm and movement in my pelvic floor movements. And then even in the orgasm, it was actually quite much deeper. And even for something like having 2 months of stress, and this was actually taken when I was just in a really dark period of my time, and I was just going through so much stress for about 2 months. And you can see actually how much of a toll it took on my own pleasure. And as small as these experiments may be, it was all a huge revelation to me to take control of understanding my own body and pleasure. And in the 6 years of working on this company, it went from fear to total excitement to continually experiment and find all the unique nuances of my sexual pleasure. And then finally, I wanted to leave you with a final thought. The impact that this can have to science and understanding how connected our overall health is to sexual wellness. So this is actually taken from one of our users, with her permission, of course. And she's an athlete, and one of her things, and if you can see on her left, the before graph, this is actually, she's a volcano type. So you can see a huge explosion of force right around the 100-second mark. And one of the big things was she kind of reached out to us and was like, hey, I think something's wrong with my lioness. It seems like it's flatlining. It seems like maybe there's something wrong with the hardware. And so we went through these diagnosis steps of checking the software, the firmware, the hardware, and we couldn't find anything happen. And it was actually this graph that you see on the after. We were like, hey, did something happen on this specific date or around this time? And she was like, oh, I had a sports injury. She's like, I had a minor concussion. But she really didn't take it really seriously, because she was like, oh, it's pretty minor. I don't think it's a big deal. And then we were like, oh, I think there might be something that, is affecting your orgasms. And I think it might be the concussion. And so she actually went back to her doctor and she took it a lot more seriously to kind of realize that, it was affecting all aspects of her body. And so she would actually start going to physical therapy, and actually over the year, you can actually see kind of her graphs go back to what her before graph looked like. And so even being able to present, very specific instances and cases like this to doctors and researchers, our hope is that we can continue to work with researchers in medical and academic fields to kind of continue understanding all the little nuances and aspects of sexual wellness, sexual pleasure, and how it's tied to our overall health. So I think there's truly so many discoveries to be made in the world of sexual pleasure, what makes us unique, what makes us the same, and we'll never know until we really break these stigmas. And it starts with us embracing the idea of being our own scientists for our bodies, no matter what part of the journey you're on. And as we like to always say, never measured, never improved. So I really do hope everyone does some self-exploration soon. And my email is on the bottom, anna@lioness.io. If you ever want to reach out or talk, I'm happy to talk about this. It's also been my own journey to be really open and being able to share all my data and just being able to have open conversations. So I'm not sure if there's, let me stop share, any more time permitting, but I'm happy to take questions if anyone has them. I can read it from the chat and answer them. Is that how it goes?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, first of all, Anna, so much for sharing. It was really funny to watch the chat because first it was very quiet. It got very quiet. It was like, we're talking about, okay. And then it got rolling because thanks to your graphs and sort of your openness. So thank you for that. One comment among other things in the chat that said, why is it still the case that male sexuality in comparison is so much part of our culture, media, and you see it in art and film, and it's often subject of jokes and comedy and all of that and other topics, while female sexuality is not. So what have you seen throughout sort of your work since you've started Lioness? And your own personal journey that has changed this discussion in the society?
Definitely. So I think one of my favorite stories to tell, it's like a little bit of a funny one. Before I really joined into doing this full time, I actually met a founder of a different sex toy company that doesn't exist anymore. And I remember being like, and it was a male founder and CEO, and I was like, how do you know what you're building works? Like, how do you know it works for people with vaginas? And he was like, there's this industry standard where you put the vibration on your nose, and that's what a clitoris feels. And it's so true that I think historically in this industry, it's actually been a quite male-dominated industry. So when you go to different conventions, that's kind of what they're doing. They're like, put it on your nose, put it on between your fingers. And so we're only seeing this new shift now into this, even the coined term of sex tech and femtech, where I think people with vaginas are kind of building for themselves and kind of opening up these new ideas and concepts of what we can do better, and not taking the traditional path of just building something that just vibrates. So I think beyond that, even in just research, which I can talk for hours, is that not even just in female sexual wellness, in female health, if there's studies that have like mice or testing animals, it's not required that they use female mice. And so most often they're actually only using male mice in the studies because they don't want the female mice hormones to affect the studies. And so we don't actually really know historically over the decades how different drugs or different things can affect female bodies. So for example, Ambien, when it first was released, they realized that because they didn't do any study on female mice, it was a severe overdose in women because the way they metabolized was so different. And it took them 15 years to actually change the dosage recommendation between male and female. And so I think we're just seeing that we came from such a limited knowledge space. So even just in health, so when we're looking at sexual health, it's been such a disregarded thing of being, just like this mysterious thing. And so we're just taking an approach to figure out how we can make it more of a conversation, more, make it more scientific, making these different researches and like being able to talk about it. And I think we're only starting to see that really now with all these amazing sex tech and femtech companies come up.